I'd like to introduce our speaker, Andrea Wells, RECE and professor at Sault College. Currently, Andrea is a professor at Sault College and also runs a nature-based early childhood education pilot program, Wild Roots, through the Little Lions Waldorf Child and Family Center in Sault Ste. Marie. Andrea embarked on a self-designed study tour of nature-based programs in Germany, Scotland, Norway, Sweden, and Denmark, and participated in workshops and training to explore how nature-based programs could be incorporated in early childhood programming. Andrea completed her forest school and nature kindergarten training in Scotland with Claire Warden and focused her Masters of Education work on nature-based early childhood programs. And so with that, I'd like to turn it over tonight to our speaker, Andrea Wells. Thank you very much for joining us, Andrea.
All right, here we are. Well, I'm really excited to share my thoughts about nature-based programming with you today. So hello, everyone. It's a topic, as Melinda had said, that I've been exploring for quite a few years, and I'm always keen to talk with other educators about it. It would be lovely to be doing this face-to-face, but this is such a wonderful opportunity to connect with so many people. Before I begin, I just wanted to state I'm going to be presenting a variety of ideas today, and I just want to be clear that these are ideas that resonate with me, with my current beliefs and values and my own social cultural context. And I think that's really important to discuss because, while I was visiting programs in other countries, which was wonderful, I certainly was cognizant of the fact that I couldn't just take what I had seen and directly transplant that into the work that I do here. It needed some professional assessment, looking at my own and my community's social cultural context and the pedagogical approaches that are a part of our province's guidelines. So although the experiences that I had reaffirmed some of my thoughts, gave me new ideas that I could assess and expand on, and in some cases challenged me to think about things a little different and shift my perspectives. Again, it was all done with an understanding that I couldn't just take what I saw and plunk it in. So I'm hoping in this presentation that you'll do the same thing, that you're going to have a reinforcement of your beliefs about nature-based programming, that you'll have an opportunity to be provided with some new ideas, and perhaps will be springboards for other ideas, and perhaps a little bit of a challenge that might shift some of your own perspectives. So what we're going to be doing, we'll have a look again at Standard 3 and some of the key aspects that we're going to be exploring. We're going to look at a little bit of the research, and I do have to say this is going to be a very sort of brief little introduction into this topic area. Hopefully that you'll be able to delve in on your own time as well. At the end of the presentation, we'll go over some of the resources that I found very useful that you might find helpful, and I think there might be an attachment as well that sums up all of those resources. We'll be looking at a definition of a nature-based early childhood program. We'll look at a range of possibilities in terms of hopefully you'll be able to see yourself on that range where you are with your program. We'll look at some ideas that you can consider and look at some other considerations that are connected to nature-based programming. We'll briefly talk about exploring the role of risk in children's play. I believe there's some other sessions that are going to be offered that are also going to give you some insights into that, a really important part of any kind of nature-based programming. And then I'd like to introduce the idea of wild pedagogy as, again, another opportunity to look at things. And we'll be looking at the resources as well. So when we look at that standard, Melinda's sort of given us the overall expectation of this standard. What we'll be covering today is, again, a brief introduction to some of the research and how to access more of the research because there's a lot that's emerging. We're also going to be looking at the way that we can observe and monitor the learning environment and to ensure that it's a space where children can thrive. And then we're also going to look at some opportunities for connecting children to the natural world and the outdoors. In terms of an indoor space, we're not going to be talking so much about that because this one is specifically about the outdoors. There is a lot that you can do in indoor spaces as well, but we're going to be focusing on the outdoor. So referring to research, I think, is really important because it can help you to articulate why integration adds to early childhood programs and can meet the goals and expectations that are outlined in whatever provincial guidelines that you are following. So being able to articulate gives you an opportunity to reaffirm, and also perhaps you may need to convince people of the benefits of nature-based programming. Could be with your colleagues, with parents, or with a board if you're needing to work with your board to be able to integrate. So there's a lot of research out there in the last 10-15 years, and much more emerging as well. And again, at the end of the slide presentation, there are a couple of places where you can access some of the current research, and then I've got a list as well of some of the research that I found quite useful. So the big one here is that there is quite a bit of research to say that working in natural spaces actually can support learning and development in all of the domains. In the past, we've often thought that when children are outdoors and even in natural spaces, that it's just a place for children to blow off steam and there really wasn't much learning. And now we can see from our research that actually in some cases the learning and the development is much deeper than what you might find in an indoor space. Some of the key things: increased pro-social behaviors, emotional coping and stress reduction have been a big part, and people have seen some big differences in children. The active play, strengthening functioning in cognitive areas such as perception, attention, creative problem solving, and complex thinking, all really key things that we're hoping to incorporate for children. Children have been found to be more physically and mentally healthier, and there is some nice research that indicates that academic performance is actually improved when children are spending time in natural spaces. So again, we're just doing a really quick overview, but there is quite a bit of research, and I hope that you'll access that again if you need to be able to present ideas and a case for why this is important. There's also some good research to show that there are reductions in symptoms of ADD. There's people doing some work with children on the autism spectrum. So again, another good reason for us to get outside into natural spaces. And then another really important part is just this foundation for respect and connection with the natural world. And again, some nice research on that as well. So a nature-based early childhood program, there are quite a few different definitions, and this is the one that was defined for me by Claire Warden when I was doing my training with her, and it's the one that I use to frame my work. So the photos that you're going to see here are from the Wild Roots program that I'm working in. It was a project that I undertook this year on a PD leave. We started up in April, and it is a licensed program, preschool program, run as a parent cooperative, and we've had some wonderful experiences, and I'll chat a little bit more about them, but I wanted to acknowledge that these are the children and parents who are a part of our program. So the first definition, or part of that definition, is prolonged periods of time in spaces where the rest of the natural world thrives. And here we're looking at establishing a connection with a place. So it isn't just a one-time visit to a place. It's somewhere that children return to over and over again. And it can be a very small space. It doesn't have to be a large space, but the idea of a place where we see more than just a garden, some place where the natural world, whatever that is for your area, can thrive. And we'll look at some ways that we can integrate that even if you're in a very urban setting and you might think there is no natural world. The other important thing is that it's over time, so we can see the changes that are occurring in our programs. Really key. Also, uninterrupted time for child-led play with open-ended materials. If you are in a natural setting, those open-ended materials are naturally there. And then again, that time, longer time periods for children to really be engaged and immersed in their spaces. In our program, we don't bring any toys with us. We have a few tools, and our children are always engaged, actually with some very interesting kinds of play that emerge that are very much leading themselves to inquiry and exploration. Responsive and reflective educators is key. People who are observing the children, offering provocations to enhance experiences, and of course pedagogical documentation is a key component as well. Seeing children as competent and capable, being collaborators in their learning is an important part for a nature-based program, and then seeing nature as a co-educator. We often talk about the environment as a third teacher, but in this case, we can actually look at nature as being a co-teacher as well. Someone was talking about, or had asked a question about how you can support learning. And I'd like to give an example from one of the schools that I worked with at F.H. Clerg School here in Sault Ste. Marie, where they wanted to do 2 weeks outside. That was their little project. They had done that. They were doing that at the end of the school year. And the teacher had a whole set program. And they started off with their set program of the children finding a tree and measuring the tree and doing all of that. And then they were going to just explore what would happen if they didn't have a set activity that children had to do. And they found that the children naturally gravitated to some really interesting activities. And in this case, the children were interested in building a bridge, and the math that came out of that, the language experiences that came out of that, the collaboration with each other, and that cooperation was phenomenal. And the teacher said that they actually met, in reflecting back on what the children were doing, they actually met more of their outcomes than they had with the pre-prescribed, if you like, activity-based, teacher-directed kind of work. So nature can actually be quite an asset in this case. We also want to look at spaces where children may have a sense of being on their own, opportunities to challenge themselves, reflect, and be engaged in active play. And this includes some risk in their play, which we're going to talk about a little bit more. Connecting with the social cultural context of the community, really important piece. For us, sugar maple trees are an important activity of tapping them for sap in the springtime. So it would make sense for us to do that kind of activity with our children if we had a sugar maple tree that was ready for being tapped. So an example of how we, because we do that here doesn't mean that you would do it in your area if that's not something that's a part of your socio-cultural context. Another example, when I was in Germany, there was a center, they had built a shelter made that looked like a castle, and that made a lot of sense because the children could actually see a castle in the background of their play space. So again, looking at that part. We've also, in our Wild Roots program, have looked to work with some elders. We've consulted with them and are hoping to build that relationship and make that much stronger so that we can have a better understanding of some of the Indigenous knowledge around the understanding of nature and our relationship with them, with the rest of the natural world. Ensuring that families feel included, and then healthy lifestyles that are promoted, which includes ecologically conscious practices. Again, they can be very simple practices like encouraging your families to bring healthy snacks in reusable containers that are sustainably made, washing hands and using towels, capturing wastewater. Those are just some really tiny examples of how that can be incorporated. So does this fit with our early childhood curriculum and pedagogical approaches? I really think it does. I think that, in listening to those defining statements, we can see that if we look at the How Does Learning Happen document, that well-being is represented in the prolonged periods of time in the natural world, the healthy lifestyles, the opportunity for a little bit of risk and challenge. We also see it in engagement with responsive and reflective educators that are watching the children and enhancing their play, giving them time for uninterrupted child-led play is certainly under the expression, and we can see belonging in quite a few contexts as well. So I think that we could easily make a case for the fact that introducing nature-based programming does fit with our curriculum planning. If we look at kindergarten programs, again, I think you'll see that the frameworks are also well represented in that definition. And if you are still looking at the ELECT document as well, it covers many of the 6 principles. So we want to look at a range of nature-based early childhood outdoor programs. There is a range, and all of these different places can begin the process of integrating nature. So you might be in a place where you're feeling like it's very sterile, manufactured. You might have artificial grounds. You might not have a lot of loose ends, open-ended materials or loose parts. You might be in a very controlled, naturalized, outdoor, fenced-in play space with loose parts. And by controlled, I mean a garden, perhaps that the children aren't allowed to go into or touch. It's very domesticated, if you like. So that might be where your program is at. And then at the far end of that is a program that's located in a natural environment without fences and with lots of loose parts. And that's what our Wild Roots program has been fashioned under. And like I said, we were able to write up our policies and get a license to run our program in that way. So there are possibilities. And again, have a look at where you might be on that range and know that wherever you are, you can start to integrate your programming. So I have, as I mentioned before, had lots of opportunities to go to different programs and gathered lots of different kinds of ideas. And I wanted to just acknowledge here all of the educators that opened their doors and welcomed me to come and visit their programs, share their philosophies and ideas and their knowledge about nature-based programming. And it's through those opportunities that I think, I've been able to put together my own thoughts and practices. So these pictures, many of these pictures come from the training center that Claire Warden has in Scotland. She has a really nice setup that sort of takes people through what you can do with a limited space and what you might be able to do if you have a little more. So you kind of flow through a nice progression. So I'm just going to give you a couple of the ideas that might be starting points for you if you're at that end of the range where you're not feeling like you have a lot of opportunity because you have a sterile space. So one idea is to add rocks or other natural ground cover, perhaps to cover up the asphalt or concrete that you might have. It might be just a small section that you can bring in some little rocks or other, like I said, natural ground cover to cover that up. I'm really intrigued with the little shelter or den that's up on the left-hand corner, where you could make a roof with some wild flowers or grasses that might attract some different insects or other kinds of animals, and then also creates this little shelter that you can still see and supervise children. Again, the other idea is to have planters with some natural grasses. Again, that can bring in perhaps a little bit of a natural space. Creating mud kitchens brings an opportunity to just even have their hands in some some dirt. And I know that you can purchase really expensive ones, but you can make very simple ones out of found materials as well. Adding rocks to your center. Again, rocks have some wonderful textures and things for children to explore. That might be something you can add. And adding natural textured materials to your fence. So if you look at the bottom left-hand corner, these are just some leftovers from the milling of wood, and they've been attached to a fence. And again, if you can get some really interesting kinds of and different kinds of bark, all kinds of wonderful textured materials that children can explore. In the middle on the top, there is a little green space, and that's actually been created with sod. It's been turned in on itself and then watered, and if you let that just go to seed, you might be able to attract some other different kinds of wild plants to add to that. Setting up a transient art area, that's at the bottom there with the little logs. You can bring in some different materials or go out and collect some different materials with the children that they can then use to create some art pieces that later on will be dispersed. So transient art, if you look up Andy Goldsworthy, you can find some lovely examples of what transient art might look like and the philosophy behind it. And if you have a bit more space, you could add in, one of my favorites at the top right hand is a little sort of horseshoe-shaped mound, ideal for infants. You can kind of nestle a child inside there and they can have a little bit of sense of security. If you let that again go a little wild, some wonderful opportunities to see different kinds of things. You'll probably attract some different kinds of animals. It's also a wonderful place for babies to cruise and, of course, to climb on top of as well. You can also let some spaces just go wild. If you can work with your maintenance crew to make sure they don't cut everything down, that might be a project to work on, but that it doesn't have to be even a big space, but if you can let something go a little wild. And then a mud pit can be a wonderful thing. This is actually the mud pit from a center in Winnipeg, Discovery Center. I've listed them in the resources at the end. They've got a wonderful website with lots of great videos. International Mud Day is coming up at the end of June. If you Google that, you'll find all kinds of great videos of children all over the world having a wonderful time on International Mud Day. So, and that can be quite a fun experience. But Discovery Center actually has a mud pit that's around, maybe not used all the time, but it's accessible to children. The willow huts or cedar hedges are something else that you might be able to add in. What I'd like to suggest is creating a nature network for people who are interested in connecting children with nature in your own community. We've been able to connect with kindergarten teams and people working in licensed centers, and we've been getting together. We've been meeting at each other's centers to learn more about what the others are doing in their programs. We brought in guest speakers, so we had a manager of a local greenhouse come in to speak with programs about how to properly, with considerations for landscaping, for putting in hills, for planting trees. And that was really wonderful. She talked about ground cover that might be better suited for places where children are running and what might survive. We have also looked at making some connections with our local naturalist group. We have Sioux College has a natural environment and outdoor education program. So we've talked with faculty there. So that networking with each other, but then also looking at what are the networkings that you can create and the connections that you can create with people who are not necessarily working in the education field. So some other options along that continuum. The continuum is finding some space outside the fence. So the Superior Children's Center in Wawa had a wonderful story that they've given me permission to share. They had a playground where the trees were on the outside of the fence. Every morning they would go out and pick up the cones and branches and throw them over the fence because they were considered to be unsafe. And one day they were watching the children reaching through the fence, trying to grab the cones and branches. And it was at that point they said that there was a shift in their thinking. And they made some changes. They extended their playground to include the trees. They stopped removing the pine cones and the branches. And they found that the play changed, that the children weren't getting hurt with these things. There certainly were conversations around that. But the other thing that happened is they looked beyond their fence as well. And they started to find some natural play spaces that they would take small groups of children out into. E.W. Coffin School in Calgary has done some amazing work with their community to create these outdoor play spaces in some natural settings. And I encourage you to have a look at their site. They've got some great ideas that that might spark some new or generate some new ideas for you as well. So I think that sometimes just changing our perspective helps us to see things in a different light. And so there may be things right around your area that could be accessed to provide this kind of opportunity for children. At the top left-hand corner is a playground that the Little Lions Waldorf Child and Family Center in Thunder Bay created. They have a licensed center in a school, and they actually put a fence. They fenced in just a part of the forested area, and that's where they go to play with the children. They don't take any toys with them, and they have found that the play has been much more engaging, lots of inquiry-based kinds of activities happening. The children are curious, asking deep questions. And the other thing they reported is that they actually had a reduction in the number of injuries that children sustained. So something to think about. They also have an agreement with an outdoor recreation program, and they go there for blocks of time in the summer, again, with these opportunities for children to be engaged outdoors. You could also walk to natural play spaces. I was in some programs where they actually walked for quite a long time period, and it's been interesting in our Wild Roots program. We have some children that are 2 years old, and it's amazing how far they actually can walk, and especially with practice, their endurance has certainly increased significantly. Taking the bus to natural play spaces. So this was a program in Germany, and they not only did this for convenience, but they also saw it as a more ecologically sound way of getting around. They would take the city bus to their play space and walk a little distance to get to their natural space. Accessing funding for busing to natural spaces. St. Mary's French Immersion School here in Sault Ste. Marie also has done some work. They've actually done quite a bit of fundraising and applying for grants. And they are now spending, I think they said, over 50 days next year out at their outdoor learning center that's part of their school board. So they've been able to figure out ways to get the busing funding to be able to do that. In Glasgow, a community agency was concerned about their children's lack of opportunities to be in natural spaces. They were in a downtown area that had very little natural spaces around them, also families that were not able to get out of the city very easily. So this center actually fundraised enough to get a van, purchase a van, and now each day they pack up their children, dress them up in rain gear, because it does rain a lot in Scotland, and they head to a natural space, and that's where their program takes place every day. Now, really stretching your thinking, the picture in the middle, this is in Norway, where a program was gifted with an oil rig emergency boat. And this program, actually, they head out to an island every day and spend their day there. I know that might not be possible for us, but it's kind of neat to think about some of the possibilities. And the last is an example of a program that doesn't have any building. This is our picture of our Wild Roots program. We have a portable toilet that we take with us and a hand washing station. We have a few tools and a couple of emergency things. And other than that, that's our space. And I'll talk a little bit more about how we manage that space in a little bit. So again, there are lots of links for you to access. Also some wonderful resources like the Evergreen Foundation that can definitely help to provide. I'm just looking for something else that can help to provide. I didn't mention Rusty Keeler. There's a really wonderful article of 20 ways that you can enhance your outdoor spaces. He's got a wonderful website as well. And Adam Bienenstock also has some great ideas on his website. So those resources are again at the end of the slideshow. So other considerations, if you're going to be spending more time outdoors, is to consider the seasons. For us in Sault Ste. Marie, we are thinking about rain. We think about our winter time and the colder temperatures that we can have. A big one for us is black flies and mosquitoes. That's a big one to contend with, and sun, of course. Clothing makes a big difference. So rain gear, if you have the proper clothing, you can be out in almost any kind of weather. Protection from the insects, we've been exploring bug jackets and bug nets. Sun gear is another important one, and of course really warm clothing for the winter. And our parents have been communicating with each other, sharing what's working, what isn't working. So, that's a nice way to engage your families as well. Rest time, is there a consideration for how we can have some rest time outdoors with fresher air? Again, another one that really challenged my thinking was in Sweden, where one of the infant programs, I noticed that, they had a lovely outdoor resting place, but I didn't see anything indoors. Their children sleep outside up to minus 20 degrees Celsius in the wintertime. And they looked at me like, what's the problem here? We have warm sleeping bags. It's not a big issue. So I'm not saying that that's what we need to be doing, but is it something we could think about? Gardening and farming is something I haven't really talked much about. That's another whole topic that could be discussed. But there are some wonderful things that could be done with that, and some nice links with ecologically sound practices. The toileting and hand washing, of course, is a consideration. How will that work? We've been able to work with our health unit to come up with a process that's working very well for us and is meeting the expectations that they have. And then, there's always the conversation around fire and tool use. Again, that could be another whole webinar, but these are some things that I think a conversation about why that's important to introduce is a nice topic to have with each other. And there we go. So we'll move into the exploration of exploring the role of risk in children's play. And we do need to look at our environments to see how they're safe, but it's also important for us to provide children with interesting opportunities for a reasonable degree of risk-taking. That doesn't mean that we're going to give children a chainsaw and let them go. There is a process in place. We want children to become risk assessors themselves, and so that needs to be modeled, needs to be discussed. But in the end, we want to ensure that our children have opportunities to encounter a risky situation in their play, to confront the danger, to challenge their limits and overcome fear. There are, again, some resources that I have found very useful to help me with that thinking process, to look at why it's important to offer risk to young children, and some processes to work through. Claire Warden would say be risk aware, not risk averse, and I think that's a really good thing to think about. We need to be aware of the risks, but not be averse, and not let it necessarily stop us from doing things. Claire Warden actually does have a webinar on one of the tools that we're using in our Wild Roots program called a benefit risk assessment. And I'd like to just describe a little bit about how that works. So a benefit risk assessment first looks at the benefits of the activity. Why are we doing this activity? What are the benefits to the children? If we can't answer that question, then maybe we shouldn't be doing that activity. And then we would look at the hazards. So what might be some of the hazards with this activity, and what are the associated risks, and then look at some ways to manage that. So in our program, the parents, because we are a parent cooperative, the parents and I walked around our area to look at some of the things that might be considered hazards. We explored the risks and then looked at ways to manage those, and those were all written up in documents that were posted on our closed website and are constantly being assessed. Things are happening where we're saying, okay, we need to step back, let's look at this again, or something comes up that we didn't anticipate, and then we do another benefit risk assessment. So they're definitely dynamic and ever evolving. But it isn't just enough for the adults to be doing this. We also need to engage the children as well. So in our program, we've created some picture cards of things for children to watch for and what to do. And we are asking the children, what do you think we would do if we come across some glass? And they have some great ideas, and we have our processes as well that we reinforce with them. We also discuss activities with them. We talk about, again, just like doing the benefit risk assessments with the adults, we do that with the children. And again, they come up with some really creative ways to engage in that as well. And then we do daily perimeter walks to assess our area. So before we start our play, we would do a walk around. We would look up into the canopy if we're in the forest to look at, are there any branches that are hanging, anything that looks like it could be falling from the trees. We look at our eye level and we look on the ground. And that's actually been quite interesting because it's also stopped us from trampling on things that are emerging, like milkweed that is really important for the monarch butterflies. A really nice example has been we have quite a few hawthorn trees in our area, and rather than cutting them down, we talked with the children about hawthorns. We looked at the thorns. The children were very quick to catch on to the hawthorn tree and identify the trees, alert each other when they came across a hawthorn tree, so much so that one day when some other school children were at the outdoor learning center that we're at, came and were running around all over the place and not paying attention, our children were quite concerned that these children would get hurt and wanted to then set up, could we put some flagging tape on the trees so that they could alert them. So we see here how the children themselves have become risk aware and are able to manage things. We also have in our community bears that are out in the community. We have quite an extensive procedure, a proactive procedure, and then what we would do if we do encounter it. So again, we're certainly aware of the risk, but we feel that we have some processes in place that help to manage that. So again, just to let you know that there are lots of resources, some food for thought for you to consider when it comes to that. So I'd like to my last thought is to talk a little bit about wild pedagogy. I had the opportunity to do a couple of colloquiums where I worked with other educators from different countries and educational backgrounds to talk about this particular topic. And it is a way of perhaps having us rethink how we are in the world, how our connections to the rest of the natural world are evolving, how we might need to do a little bit of shifting, having us think about challenging dominant cultural ideas about control. That takes us into sort of colonization and what we might be able to do to rectify some of that, learning from the place and landscapes. It's a big topic and certainly not enough time to really talk about it today, but I'd like to just let you know that there is an article and a soon-to-be released book that introduces people to this concept. What I really like about it is that there are some initial touchstones that have been offered with the intention to present some underlying principles and to offer some opportunities for discussion. So one of the touchstones is nature as a co-teacher, and they list a number of questions such as, what habits did I fall back on today that place at a distance, undervalue, or denigrate the rest of the natural world? So these are opportunities then for you and the people you're working with to have that conversation and see how that shifts and changes. So for me, one of the things is to use the term rest of the natural world, so that I remember that I am a part of nature and not separate from it. And that does shift your thinking just a little bit. Another way that wild pedagogy has influenced our program is with a policy on sharing spaces. So we were considering animal encounters, and then we started to think about it, that it wasn't just from a human-centric viewpoint, but how does an animal encounter, or for that matter, even plants and rocks and water, how are they impacted, or how are they impacted by our actions as well? So we came up with a policy that would consider both or all of the natural world, which includes us as well. Part of this was an animal encounter policy where our children, if they were to see a dog or a bear, we were specifically looking at that, they would yell out animal. Everyone would cross their arms, be quiet, and stand still. So our big thing was that children wouldn't start running towards or away from. The adults would sort of bring the children together, and then we would move forward from there. What's happened with this is that our children have taken this quite to heart, and anytime we see an animal, we are stopping, crossing our arms, quieting ourselves, and then, so we are now, takes us a long time sometimes to get to our play space because we stop for every spider or insect that we see, birds in trees. But what's been really nice is that we've had this quiet space where we are working on respectfully watching these animals in their natural state. Plants, for instance, we've been spending time also looking at plants. So some really nice things have occurred through this policy that I didn't even anticipate. And again, coming from that wild pedagogy kind of thinking. And in the creation of our foundation for our Wild Roots program, we also considered how we were learning in our nature-based setting. And so this is a diagram, again, that was influenced by this wild pedagogy that depicts the shift that we're hoping to create, where we're able to make these relationships more equitable. So just, again, some food for thought. And if you're interested in it, like I said, there are some resources for you to look into this a little bit more. And I always do really enjoy having conversations with people who would like to look into this a little bit more. So you can let me know. So my final question is, are you ready? Are you feeling like some things that you've been thinking have been reaffirmed? Did you get some new ideas that you can move forward with to integrate nature into your programs? Are there some challenges, some things that are making you rethink some of your own thoughts about nature-based programming? And maybe there's going to be a little bit of a shift. I'm certainly hopeful that that's the case. And I do want to let you know that sometimes when you think outside the box and don't take no for an answer, some really interesting things can happen. The process of creating policies to meet all of the legislative requirements was certainly a huge task and sometimes very challenging. But I found for myself a lot of support from our health unit, from our program advisors to help out. Also, like I said, we've got some other connections to some programs, both in kindergarten programs and in licensed programs that have had some wonderful successes as well. So I encourage you to use some of the resources, and we'll just go through them very quickly. So the Accessing Research, the Children in Nature Network and Natural Start Alliance both have some wonderful areas for you to find out more about the current research. And at the end of the slideshow, there's also the actual links to some of the research that's mentioned in this next slide that talks about specifics about the benefits and the research around that. These are some of the supports and resources. So I mentioned Rusty Keeler and the Evergreen Foundation. So again, please explore them. Forest School Canada is now quite active, doing quite a lot of training. So if that's an area you'd like to work on, please look into their site as well. But again, there's some things there for you to look at. Here's some of the programs in our Wild Roots program. We also have a little bit of a website up that gives you a little more information about us, but also some things from schools and other licensed centers. And here's some resources for food for thought about risk in play. And here's the wild pedagogy resources.